Who's going to forget Bartholomew? I know. So, one of the test questions on every single one of my confirmation tests is, what is Pastor Sean's favorite psalm? What is it? 100. Psalm 100. And I was so honored when Frances gave us her talk during Lent that she chose to put Psalm 100 in there. So, of course, when it came up in the lectionary, I had to preach on it, right? So the reason this came and is so special to me is that when I was in choir, when I was a wee one, they let me in before I could even read, but at this story I was probably about 7. And we had the choir robes, which were white, and they had big sleeves, and they came down to right about here, and they snapped up, and they had little Peter Pan collars. And I think this was the church's attempt to make us look like little angels, which, of course, everybody knew we weren't, but at least singing in the choir, we looked that way. And we had these big black or they were bows, really, and they had pieces of elastic that went underneath the Peter Pan collar, and then they snapped right here to hold on. And if yours had been washed for some reason, it was all saggy. So everybody fought to get the ones that had been pressed really well. And then we had these little kind of mint green hats that were round, and they sat on the top of your head. And so the girls all had to get theirs bobby pinned on, and we used to make fun of the boys, especially with the buzz cuts, because they had nothing there to keep their hats on. And so if you had someone sitting behind you in the pew, they'd try to get the hat off the person sitting in front of them. Yes, we were truly paying attention to what was going on. So the 100th Psalm was one of the songs that the choir director had us sing. And the choir director had this gong. And the gong was sat about this tall and this wide. And the roundness of it was like this, but it had a really deep sound to it. And it wasn't until I was an adult that I figured out how he picked the person that got to do the gong, because consistently it was boys. And I've now realized, and especially going through some teacher training, that it was the child that was acting out the most that the teacher was trying to bring into the classroom. So this one little boy in particular's name was Breck for this particular song. So Breck had the gong. And the first time there was a pause, he got to gong once, gong. And the second time twice, gong, gong. And the third time, you guessed it, gong, gong, gong. So I'm going to invite all of you to get your gongs out and sing this song with me and gong. Remember, the first time twice, first one, second time twice, third time 3 times. All right? Goes, make a joyful noise unto the Lord, all ye lands. Gong, serve the Lord with gladness. Gong, gong, come before his presence with singing. Gong, 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 enter his gates with thanksgiving. Gong, and his courts with praise. Gong, gong, gong. So you can see where a bunch of 6, 7, 8, 9-year-olds would love this song. So when we would sing this, we would be able to get as loud as we wanted to and as joyful as we wanted to. And the service that we always sang out was 8 o'clock in the morning, and you could see the parents sitting out there totally exhausted. And you've got all of these kids really ready to go with the gong, gong, gongs. So make a joyful noise unto the Lord, all ye lands. Serve the Lord with gladness. Come before his presence with singing, and enter his gates with thanksgiving. So what we know is that we learn things easier through song, right? We saw that with the reason our kids know all of the names to Santa's reindeer and not necessarily all of the names of the disciples, but we'll work on that. So there was a song that my daughter Tally learned when she was 4. She was going to Montessori school, and she came home one day, and of course every parent knows that their child is incredibly smart. And so she came home with this song, and it goes, Island, 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 lake. Isthmus, 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 strait. Gulf, gulf, peninsula. These are the land formations. But when a 4-year-old is saying this to you, it takes you 7 or 8 times to listen to it to get what peninsula really is. Some of the words went together, but I thought, this is pretty cool that she knows what these land formations are. Of course, she could just sing them. She didn't really know what the land formations were, but, you know, as a mom of your first child, this was pretty impressive. So then she came home the next day and she said, an island is land surrounded by water, and water surrounded by land is a lake. And land on this line, land on that side, water in the middle, that's an isthmus. So I'm thinking maybe she does know what she's talking about. So I got out the globe and said, show me where these are. And she just looked at me like, but she knew the words. But today is Island Sunday, so we're talking about land with water all around it. So I started thinking, what was the first island that I can remember learning about? And I really think it had to be that island of misfit toys that was in Rudolph. It was the first time I had ever thought about how a toy must have felt when they had been rejected. And it made me start thinking, I wouldn't mind a toy soldier with just one leg. And if I got a dog, a stuffed dog that just had one eye, well, they could still see out the other one. So what this Isle of Misfit Toys taught me was compassion. And I can remember the next year watching it and going, I think that's where I'd like my toys from next time, is the Isle of Misfit Toys. Then the next island that I thought of was, I can remember reading the book Island of the Blue Dolphins. Anybody else read that? Island of the Blue Dolphins is about an indigenous family that lives on in the Aleutian Islands, and all of this little girl's family gets killed, and she is there by herself. And so she gets with a pack of dogs, and they become close to each other. But as a little girl that's about 9 when I read this, it empowered me to think, if I ever got left by myself, this little girl, Kuna, could do it. I bet I could do it too on this island of the Blue Dolphins. Now, the next island I could think of seeing was Gilligan's Island. Yes, you know, the professor and Mary Ann. And when I thought back about that, what I learned from Gilligan's Island is really there that not everybody was equal, or at least not in the people's eyes that were there. Because the movie star obviously was better than Mary Ann. And you had to know that the skipper was better than Gilligan, because Gilligan kept getting hit with the hat. And all of the rich people, the Howells, wanted to do was sit there and have everybody wait on them. And the professor, his use was just to try to get them off. So when they worked together, it seemed to work. But most of the time, it didn't seem that they worked together. Now, the next island was Neverland. It was a bunch of dumb boys, and they did dumb things, and they got donkey ears because it served them right. And that's what happens when you're irresponsible. So from Neverland, that's what I got out of that. You're irresponsible, you have to take the consequences. Terror Island. Now, I have to tell you, I've never seen the movie, but I know I have experienced terror. And for me, it usually comes of things that I'm afraid of that don't ever actually happen, but inside my psyche. I get scared. And for some reason, Terror Island loves to show up to me between the hours of 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. when it is dark, and especially if I'm alone in the house and there's lightning outside. Terror Island is the one that bothers me the most because I always seem to be by myself, and it always seems to be having to deal with something that's totally out of my control. And I have to say, I don't get much sleep when I'm on Terror Island. Now, another island was McHale's Navy Island. I have to tell you, I did not have anybody in my family that was in the military. So this was my first sense of having a military and the progression of that, what that looked like. And they were on boats, and I've always loved boats. So I thought, that is so cool. Then Jackson Island. Who knows where Jackson Island's from, what book it's from? It's from Tom Sawyer. And being a Southern girl myself, I loved Tom Sawyer. I loved Huck Finn. I loved the fact that there were two friends that could take on the world and could go do whatever they wanted to do. And they went rafting, and I have gone whitewater rafting 3 or 4 times, and I just love that sense of, yes, we can do it. Good friends. Good friends will get you through all of it. And then there's Fantasy Island. You know, the plane. But what happened at Fantasy Island, I can best describe as the first time I ever went on a plane. The first time I ever went on a plane, we lived in Little Rock, and we were flying to Shreveport, Louisiana, long distance. In this little bitty prop jet, we were going to see some of my mother's family. And my mom tells the story that I got all dressed up in my Sunday best, because that's how you used to ride on a plane, with your white patent shoes and your gloves and everything. And we got on there, and it was 2 seats here and 1 seat here. So I was sitting next to my mom, the window, me, my mom, and then right across the aisle was my sister Kathy. And the plane started, and it was shaking, and that was when they passed gum out to you to help pop your ears. And right as it was getting ready to go off, the whole plane's shaking, and I looked at Mom and said, "Why do you always give me what I ask for?" And that's kind of what I got from the Fantasy Island, is a lot of times you ask for things, thinking that what you ask for is what you really want, and thinking that it's going to end the way you want it to. But we can't always see everything that gets involved in our fantasies. And it doesn't always work out the way we thought or wanted it to. And then there's Treasure Island. And we go to Treasure Island looking for something concrete. But what we really take away from Treasure Island is that the journey is the treasure, and who we find out we are as people are the real treasure, not the concrete stuff we originally were looking for. Gold, sapphires, emeralds really aren't worth the relationships that we have with people. And the movie Castaway with Tom Hanks. Yeah. It taught me that God was with me any place and every place I went, even if it turns out to be a ball named Wilson. God meets us where we are and keeps us from being all by ourselves. And then the last one is Bali High from South Pacific. Yeah, who heard the sound in their eye of the Bali High, and all the mist, and all the fact that in the midst of all the prejudice that was there, of the war that was going on, and as the death that was everywhere, there was that mystery that surrounded them. That God that was there, not that took the pain away, but that stood with them through the prejudice, that stood with them through the war, that stood with them with the deaths. You see, I've learned a lot from islands. I have learned good times and bad times and friendships and how to handle terror, and that God is always with me in all of it. And then when I think about the water that's always around me on an island, I can't help but think of my baptism and how I'm grounded in that, as each of us are. And so as we celebrate this Psalm 100 Island Sunday, Psalm 100 itself is saying to know God is to make a joyful noise, to sing the papaya song and shout papaya as loud as you can, to come before God with singing and saying, God, here I am, regardless of what language it is, regardless of where you are in your life or where you are in the world. God has known you and made you special just the way you are. God knows that in here, every single person is on a different island than the person sitting next to them. Yet God sits right beside us. So if you're on Terror Island, or if you're on Castaway Island, or if you're on Jackson Island, or even if you're on McHale's Navy's Island, God is there with you, today, tomorrow, and always. And all God's people say, amen.